I'm live. I'm live. I think I'm live. All right. Well, good morning from Japan. And get ready to hear Narada answer the Prachetas. Let's review what the Prachetas asked. Let's see what they asked him. So they developed deep realization by living with Marisha, their wife, while remembering what the most attractive had told them. When they had finally given their wife a son, they departed from their home. They went westward to the seashore, where Jajali taught them the meaning of the Vedas, and they were able to see all things the same way they saw themselves. They mastered the asana of standing straight up, which gave them complete control of their breath, feeling, words, and perceptions, and allowed them to concentrate themselves on Brahman without distraction or confusion. Narada, who is adored by gods and demons alike, saw them doing this. When he came before them, they all welcomed him enthusiastically, bowing fully on the ground. After they had given him a respectable and comfortable seat, they began to inquire. So here's the questions that Narada is going to be replying to today. They said, "Welcome, sage of the gods. By good fortune today you come within our sight, just like the sun. Whenever you appear, confusion subsides." Still haven't asked the question. "Our infatuation with conventional affairs has almost obliterated what we learned from all-attractive Shiva and Adokshaja. Please rekindle our true perception of selfhood, which would carry us to the far shore of the insurpassable ocean of being." So that's their question, really. It's not exactly a question, but a request. Please, we got instruction about true perception of selfhood, but we kind of feel fuzzy about it. So please rekindle or clarify it. Please rekindle our true perception of selfhood. This is what they consider to be the most important. So they're asking Narada to tell them how to truly perceive themselves and what a self is, where the self gets its value, etc. Narada's answer is going to be very amazing. Paradigm shifter. Narada's answer is going to be a paradigm shifter, and it's a very important paradigm to shift because the paradigm here is the self. And the way that we think of ourself is so essential to everything that we do, because the self is the basis of everything we do. I think I wanted to say something else, but I forgot what it was. Because I'm an old man with dementia. All right. We go to the next section. So this is a new section. Narada's going to reply. Narada Muni's the best, right? Narada's advice. I'll give you some original language. Maitreya Uvacha. Maitreya is the narrator. Iti pracheta samprishto Bhagavan Narado Muni. Bhagavat Yuttama Shloka Avishtatma Bravin Nirpan. Maitreya says that Narada, basically all he says here is Narada replies to the question posed by the Prachetas. Pracheta samprishta. What the request of the Prachetas or the question of the Prachetas, Narada is going to Bravin. He's going to reply to that. Narada is described as Bhagavan Narada and Muni. He's blessed Narada, and he's Muni, which means he's very learned or sagacious. And then there's one other bit that's in this statement is the description of Narada. Actually, so there's most of this statement is a description of Narada. Bhagavan Muni and also Bhagavat Yuttama Shloka Avishtatma. So these are the descriptions of Narada that are here. First of all, he is Bhagavan, right? Not Bhagavan, but Bhagavan, which means he's really inseparable from Bhagavan. So he's like a part of the experience of Bhagavan is to experience Narada. So I'd like to explain this to you. If I think of a good person, that's... who would be a good example of this? Like, if you have a friend, part of knowing your friend is understanding your friend's marriage, right? Part of understanding the friend is the friend's kids, the friend's marriage, the friend's parents, etc. Yeah, you understand? So this is how it is with Bhagavan. You don't fully understand Bhagavan without understanding Bhagavan's relations, the people that he's importantly related to. Narada is one of those people, therefore is referred to as Bhagavan. Okay, so that's one description of Narada, is that he's Bhagavan. The other one is he's Muni, very learned. The other one is that he's Avishtatma. His Atma is Avishta. His Atma is obsessed or infatuated or absorbed in something. The Atma means the heart, the self, the identity, the very self. Avishtatma. So what is he obsessed in? What is he... Not obsessed, what's the word? What is he merged in? What is he enwrapped in? What is he enwrapped in? Bhagavan. Who's Bhagavan? Uttama Shloka. What's a shloka? A shloka is like a poem. Uttama Shloka means the finest poetry. Uttama Shloka ha, as a name, means the subject of the best poetry. Narada is a poet and a singer. So who's he obsessed with? He's obsessed with the subject that's the most worth singing about, which is Bhagavan, the all-attractive one. So that's what's in this statement. The simple part of the statement is just, all right, Narada replies to the Prachetas now. The inner part of the statement is a description of Narada's character. He's very smart, Muni. He's very connected with Bhagavan. In fact, his very being is enwrapped in Bhagavan because he's the singer and Bhagavan is the subject that you sing about, if you want to sing about the best subject. Aight. Any questions? Next up is Narada Uvacha. So he's going to speak right away. So Narada Uvacha. Now, so the question is, tell us how to properly understand a self. What's the proper understanding of self? That's what they want to know from Narada. So Narada says, Tad Janma, Tani Karmani, Tad Ayus, Tan Manovacha, Vunam Yena Hi Vishvatma Sevyate Harir Ishvara. So he says, first of all, I'm not going to translate this immediately, but explain it to you a little bit from the original language. He's saying, by answering like this, he's teaching us that the self is not something that exists in a vacuum and that you know directly. This is a very, very, very important point. The self is something that exists in relation to other things, so you know it by its relation to other things. Therefore, he uses the word tat, 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 tat. So he's saying, if you want to know what the self is, then you'll know it by what it does. And then he's mentioned certain things. Tat janma, tat karma, tat ayush, tat manas, tat vacha. The self, the person that we really are, will have janma. It'll get created and take a form, take a body. Tat karma, and then that body will do deeds, will make efforts, karmas. For tad ayush, for a certain period of time, for a lifespan. And it will have a certain character of health, or have a certain degree of health or illness to it. That's what he means by the ayush. It will also be known not just by its external things, but by its internal things. Tan mana. Mana means what it feels, what it thinks, what's in its mana, which means mind. And also in the border between the internal and the external, which is the vacha, the words that come from the inner and go to the outer. So this is how you understand self. Self is understood by the way that it manifests through its janma, its birth, and then the deeds that it performs through its karma, and the ayush, or the health and lifespan that it exhibits, and the mana, the feelings that it has, and the thoughts that it has, and the vacha, the way it expresses itself. Yes. So now let me read you the translation. He says, Tad janma tani karmani tad ayush tan manovacha nrinam, of a person. And the commentator, who's my favorite commentator, Vishwanath Chakravarti, he says the reason why he says nrinam, which means of a human, it's not to exclude the other life forms, but the human is like the archetype life form in which one becomes introspective about life and self. In births other than humans, there's not a big inclination to be introspective and ask this question at all. You just go with the flow. And that's why he says for humans. Okay, so the translation is, your birth, your efforts, your health, your thoughts and feelings, and your words should serve their master. So the self is the Ishvara for the Janma. The Atma is the Ishvara for the Janma, for the Karma, for the Ayush, for the Manas, for the Vacha. So the self should be the master of its body. It should be the master of the deeds. It should be the master of its health. It's an interesting concept. It should be the master of its feelings. It should be the master of its words. And therefore, to know the self, you know it through its body, you know it through its deeds, you know it through its words, you know it through its feelings. So these feelings should be in touch with the self. Then they reveal the self. That's what he's saying. So the birth should serve the self. The body should serve the self. The deeds should serve the self. And this is actually reflexive. We do this reflexively. The self manifests the body in order to fulfill its objectives. So this is just a reflective, practical truth. And we reflexively measure the value of anything based on how well it serves our purpose. You go in and you see a purse, and your friend goes into a store and you see the same purse. You don't like the purse that much, but your friend loves the purse. Why? Because that purse goes exactly with the kind of clothes that she has, or the kind of personality that she has, and it serves her. So she values the purse highly, but you don't value it highly because it doesn't match your style. So this is reflexive. What we do in our analysis of things, of the value of things in life, is we see how well it serves the self, the identity. And Narada is saying this is how you will know yourself, is if you have your body, serve it. If you have your deeds, serve it perfectly. If you have your health, serve it perfectly. Your feelings, serve it. Your vachas, serve it. But he says now, there's Vishvatma. The Atma is the Ishvara for these things, but the Atma's Atma is the Ishvara's Ishvara, or the Parama Ishvara, the master of the master, the supreme master, the self of the self. So if the self is not known in isolation, it's known from the bottom or from the top. The self is here and it produces a birth with a body, with deeds, etc. And you know the self bottom up through the way the self acts in its body. But because the self is a branch from a root of the Supreme Self, of consciousness, the original conscious being. That Supreme Self is the self of the self, the Ishvara of the Ishvara, and the true meaning of the self is not known without knowing that being. Just like you can't know yourself without knowing your body, you also can't know yourself without knowing God. So, but the body is the bottom-up method of knowing the self, and God knowledge is the top-down method of knowing the self. And what Narada is saying here is the purpose of all the things that the self manifests is to know the self, and therefore the purpose of all the things the self manifests is to know the Supreme Self, who's the root of the self. This is why he says, Yena hi vishvatma sevyate harir ishvara. They should, all of the things about us should serve our self, our true self, the self of all selves, who's Hari. Your birth, your efforts, your health, your thoughts, your feelings, your words should all serve their master, who ultimately is the soul of all, Hari. Now he's going to stick on this point for about 3 more verses. So you could type in your questions if you have them, but let's go through these 3 verses and then I'll go and see what you guys are, if you're asking about anything. Kim janmabhis tribirveha Shokra savitra yagnikai Karma birva trai proktai Pungsopi vibudhayusha. Your birth, your efforts, your health, your thoughts and feelings and your words should all serve their master, who ultimately is the soul of all, Hari. Otherwise, what's the real point of being thrice born, undertaking efforts, studying the 3 Veda, or achieving the health and lifespan of the gods? So these are different ways that you can perfect, for example, your ayush, your health. There's ways that you can perfect your health to become godlike. And you can have an incredible lifespan and everything. Medicine is our modern way of doing it, and it's not actually particularly effective compared to the mystical ways that they do it from the mind itself, programming the body directly, which was lost to us. But there's ways, and not maybe currently available, but there were ways that you could learn how to make your health so perfect and that you would live for as long as the gods. Vibhuddhasya ayush. Vibhuddha ayush. Vibhuddha means the enlightened gods, and ayush means the lifespan of the health. So you could perfect your ayush like that. You could perfect your manas by learning the Vedas. The Vedas would not only teach you how to think, but also how to feel. It teaches you art, teaches you drama, teaches you dance, teaches you music, all kinds of emotional things the Veda can perfect, all kinds of intellectual things the Veda can perfect. Then the Veda has all these yagyas for perfecting efforts, so that your efforts can be super effective. So you can learn all that. So you can perfect your janma, you can perfect your karma, you can perfect your ayush, your manos, your vacha, but what's the point of perfecting it if it doesn't serve the self, who is served by serving the self of the self? And he says thrice born. So that you might want a footnote on what thrice born means. And actually he does explain it in the verse. Usually they just say, like, thrice born, like everybody knows it. But here he says, Kim janmabhis tribir veha Shokra savitra yagika. Those are the 3 births for cultured people. So anybody, including an animal, will have 1 birth, which is called Shokra Janma, which means reproduction. You just get a product of reproduction. The other one, the second birth, that really only happens for humans and sometimes not all humans, only kind of cultured humans, is Savitra Janma. Savitra Janma means you go to a school and you start education. So the teacher is the second parent. And you get educated through the teacher. And that's the second birth. And then the third birth is yajñaka. As the result of being born and having education, then you can do very sophisticated things, the yagyas, the very sophisticated endeavors. So the third birth is you are accepted as a person who can perform yagyas. That's technically what these three births are about. But what he's saying is, what's the point of perfecting anything else about the self if it doesn't serve the self? So he's going to continue this same theme in the next one. The next one he says, Shrutena tapasava kim vacho bischitavrittibhi buddhya va kim nipunyaya balendriya radhasa balenendriya radhasa. And this means, I'll go back. Your birth, your efforts, your health, your thoughts and feelings, and your words should all serve their master, who is the soul, but is ultimately the soul of the soul, Hari. Otherwise, what is the real point of being thrice born, undertaking efforts, studying the three Veda, or achieving the health and lifespan of the gods? What's the point of education or austerity? What's the point of saying anything or feeling anything, of knowing anything or mastering anything, or having sensitive senses and a fit body? So these are other kinds of objectives that we have. We remember this like tristrata concept of self. In the middle is the self itself. But above the self itself is the origin of the self, super self, the all self. And then below the self is the self-manifestation, the self-individuation, where it becomes a particular body and has particular deeds, qualities, thoughts, feelings, etc. Remember that will help you. So now Narada is saying, what's the point of perfecting everything in this third layer if it doesn't serve the second layer, which is the source of it? And if that's the logic, if that logic makes sense, then apply the same logic. If the lower layer, which is nourished by the top layer, if it's no point to perfecting the lower layer, but not serving the nourishing layer, then you have to go up to the top layer. The thing that nourishes the bottom, right? So if you perfect even the second layer, so-called perfected, without nourishing or understanding the top layer, what's the point? Some of the words are interesting. Shrutena tapasa vakim. Shrutena means you're going to learn a lot of stuff. Tapasa, you're going to be like so ideal. And you're going to be so disciplined. What's the point, he's saying, of doing all that stuff, hard work? What's the point of all the discipline? What's the point of all the learning, the effort to study? What's the point of vachobi, any of the words that you say? Trying to communicate with anybody. What are you trying to communicate if it has no reference to the self? Chitta vrittibi, all of the feelings that we have. What's the point of all these feelings if they're not related to the self? Buddhya va kim nipunya. So you want to become buddhya nipuna, like Einstein or Stephen Hawking or somebody that's just so expert in intelligence. What's the point? Or balenendriya radhasa. You want to have balenendriya radhasa. Balena means like a male perfection, and endriya radhasa is like a female perfection in the body. People are obsessed with this. Everybody at a gym is basically obsessed with this. They want to get their senses so alive and alert and invigorated, so they can be so easily tickled and so sensitive and feel everything that there is to feel. Great, but what's the point of it if it's not connected to yourself? That's what Narada is telling Prachetas. If you really want to know, you guys are right. To know the self is to get across to the other side of the ocean of existence. So therefore, take everything that your self does and make it relevant to the self. Take your bodily health, take your sensual activity, take your bodily strength, take your learning, take everything, and make it relevant to the self. How? By relating it to the super self, the root of the self. Kim va yogena sankhena nyasa. So he's going on more and more. They do this. They get into it. Kim va yogena sankhena nyasa svadhyaya yorapi. Kim va shreyobir anyascha na yatratma pradohari. This phrase in here is really, really interesting. Atma prada hari. This is a mind-blowing phrase. But before we get there, he's just continuing. So now he's going to mention yoga, sankhya, nyasa, swadhyaya, and any kind of shreya. So what do those words mean? You know maybe some of those words. So far he said, your births, efforts, health, thoughts and feelings, and your words should all serve their master. But ultimately the master is not just the soul, but the soul of the soul, Hari. Otherwise, what's the real point of... Now he's going to go on a long list. The real point of being thrice born, undertaking efforts, studying the three Veda, achieving the health and lifespan of the gods, education, austerity, saying things, feeling things, knowing things, mastering things, having sensitive senses or fitness in the body. Now the new stuff. What's the point of mysticism? Yoga. This is my real question. When I watch the YouTube spiritualists, what is the point of mysticism, which is absolutely devoid of context of the Supreme Self? What's the point of mysticism or science? It's not that mysticism is pointless, but you're missing the point. It's not that science is pointless, but you're missing the point. What's the point of mysticism or science or renunciation, nyasa, or swadhyaya, introspection? Introspection is so special. Yeah, it's not if you miss the point. Not if you introspect on your emotions rather than on the emoter of the emotions. What's the point of mysticism or science or renunciation or introspection? Is there anything desirable? What's the point of anything else? Shreyas anyata. Is there really anything desirable except... Then this is where this phrase comes in. Atma pradahari. So the way I'm going to translate it is really anything desirable other than... to give oneself to Hari, the foundation of the self who completely gives himself. So Atma Prada. Atma means self. Da means to give something. Prada means the source from which something is given. So Hari is described, Narada describes Hari as Atma Prada. The one who is the source from which the Atma manifests. Like sunlight. The sun itself is the Rashmi Prada. It's the source of the sunlight. So the super self or Hari is the Atma Prada, the source of you. But so this is one of the meanings of Atma Prada Hari. If you take the word Atma as meaning yourself. But Atma Prada Hari also means, that Atma also means himself. And it's very deep, and there's so many things to understand in this. He gives himself. Atma Prada means he gives himself. So this person, the Supreme Person, is a giving person. He gives himself. He's not a person that you don't want to approach, that you're scared of, that you that is yucky, but you have to deal with him. He's a great person. What's the measure of the great person? They give everything. What is everything? Everything is the self. Because nothing has value except how it's connected to the self. The person who gives themselves gives everything. More than a person that gives you $1 billion and has $20 billion. A person who gives you themselves, even if they don't give you a nickel, gives you more than the person who gives you $6 billion. So, Hari is Atma Prada. He's the person who gives himself. And this is an interesting triplicate meaning here, is that is what we are. The giving of Hari self is us. We become a manifest self. Like the sun gives the sunlight. So Atma Prada means, and Atma Prada means you should give yourself to him. Atma Prada. You should not give yourself to somebody who's not going to give themselves to you. Really. And all the people that say unconditional blah 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 is bullshit. You should not give yourself to an unworthy person. There's nothing more valuable than yourself. You should give yourself to the worthy person unconditionally. The full self, the complete self. Everything. Give it all. That's what unconditional means. It doesn't mean any slob comes along deserves everything that you are. So that phrase, Atma Prada Hari, it's very, very interesting. So I'll read you this whole paragraph one more time. And then I think, actually, before any discussion, let's see if you have any discussion. Then the stuff that he's going to say next is really going to clarify. Make it a little bit simpler. So far he said your birth, the Prachetas say, how do we know ourselves? And he says your birth, your efforts, your health, your thoughts, your feelings, your words are the manifestation of the self. You'll know yourself through them. In order to know yourself through these, make sure that they relate to the self. They're in touch with yourself. But the self cannot be known neither without reference to these things nor without reference to its root. So the best way to know the self is to make the actions relevant to the source of the self. Hari. Your birth, your efforts, your health, your thoughts, your feelings, and your words should all serve their master, who is ultimately the soul of all, Hari. Otherwise, what's the real point of being thrice born, undertaking efforts? Now he's just cutting down every other ambition. Like, remember when I posted on YouTube, if you could ask God, if God would fulfill the wish, what would you ask for? Then Narada would just cut down every one of those answers. I want to be able to cure people's diseases. I want to be able to play great music, sing like Aretha Franklin. What's the point of that? Don't you think Aretha Franklin could sing like Aretha Franklin? And don't you think if I asked Aretha Franklin, what would she ask for God? From God, she wouldn't say nothing. I have it all already. So what's the point of any kind of perfection that falls short of actually being you being you fully? What's the real point of being thrice born, undertaking efforts, studying the three Veda, or achieving the health and lifespan of the gods? What's the point of education or austerity, of saying anything, or feeling anything, of knowing anything, or mastering anything, of having sensitive senses and a fit body? What's the point of mysticism, or science, or renunciation, or introspection? Is there really anything desirable other than to give oneself to Hari, the foundation of the self, who completely gives himself? So does this mean there's no point in fitness? So let's get sick? No, it means the point of fitness is to be able to understand yourself, to use the vitality that you obtain through the fitness to be able to see yourself, experience yourself, know yourself by understanding Hari. It doesn't mean that things are pointless. Is there no point to renunciation? No, there's a point to renunciation. Don't do it pointlessly. That's what Narada is saying. Okay? Any questions? So serving other expressions of the self does count? Sure. You'll see, though. Spacebug. So by serving the self through word and action, we can serve the highest consciousness. Actually, think of the order in the hierarchy. You can do this. It can go both ways. By understanding your actions, for example, you can understand yourself. But understanding the self will give you an easier understanding of your actions. Though it may not be initially possible to understand the self, so you may begin by understanding your actions. And then understanding your actions, your karmas, will come to show you a lot about the Atma self who's performing those actions. And then that initial clarity, that initial hint that understanding the actions will allow you to understand the Atma. And then the more you understand the Atma, the more clear, very much more clear your actions, your thoughts, your feelings become. Apply that same paradigm to the first and second layer, not just the second and third. You can understand the self in order to understand the Supreme, because they're not different in their quality. They're exactly the same. So any understanding of the self which is accurate will show you the Supreme, the nature of the Supreme Self. You can do so. But if you understand the Supreme Self, it's very, very, very clear and full and deep and easy to understand the self. Same way as if you understand yourself, it's very easy to understand the actions and the thoughts and the feelings. But you can initially understand the self. So initially you begin by the super self. So you initially begin by understanding the self, by understanding your actions. But then that bit of hint that you get about the self allows you to understand the self directly, and then it opens up the bottom level more. So Bardo's saying, are we not expressions of the supersoul? It knows itself through us. This is where you're a little xenocentric, or you're a little self-centric. So you're thinking that God knows his existence through you. You made yourself pretty important. You're one of the sun rays of God, of the sun. The sun is its own entity. It produces sun rays, and sun rays are part of what the sun is. But the sun has its own existence and its own movements, etc., that are not determined by the rays. So what you're thinking is that 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 10. So 10 is the supreme. But all the 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2s is what makes the 10 a 10. No. It's not the 2 plus 2 plus 2 that makes the 10 a 10. The 10 is infinite, and it produces all kinds of infinitesimals. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnameva Vasishyate. That original being is infinitely big. And it produces infinite number of infinitesimals without decreasing. But these things don't add up to that thing. That thing is more than these things added up. It has its own existence and its own being. If you understand it, you will understand all of the things which it produces. And then subsequently all of the things that those things produce. Level 3. Layer 3. But if you don't understand it, then you have to work up from 3 to 2 to 1. Maybe that makes sense. So you're thinking like this too, Shiv Kumar. Your small self happy is everything that matters. No, it's the same mistake. You're making the same mistake. Instead of making it from 3 to 2, you're making it from 2 to 1. You remember the concept of the layers, and then everything else saying makes sense. The same mistake that people think, if I eat ice cream, I'll be happy. They're making the mistake of 3 to 2. That if 3 is happy, 2 will be happy. It's the same mistake that you're making right now when you say if the self is happy, then God is happy. God's not happy because you didn't understand the self. The self is not happy. How can the self be happy without understanding what it is? So it actually goes the other way. You're making the mistake of going 3 to 2 to 1, but it actually goes the other way. If 2 is happy, then 3 is automatically fine and perfect. Yeah. If you're laughing and happy, then you become healthy and pretty. If you're sad and worried and stressed, then you get zits, and you get fat, and you get sweaty and oily, and you look gross. Even within the layers, there's other hierarchies that follow the same pattern. It's always top down, but everybody's thinking bottom up. And in a big philosophical sense, we carry that same silly mistake up to the big levels. What Narada is actually saying is, Hari is happy, then you're happy. Hari is understood, then you're understood. But you're listening to Narada say this, and you still think, by me being happy, Hari be happy. You're xenocentric, or whatever the right word is, self-centric. And the Bhagavatam wants to crush that. Wants to smack it and break it and get it out of your system. Is this similar, Catherine asked, to the Gita when Krishna speaks of renunciation through action and not renunciation through inaction? I don't know, but I like the comment anyway. How can we give ourselves to Hari completely, Samurai Mama asks? Through being conscious. Find out. Listen carefully to the Bhagavatam, and they'll give you a step-by-step way of doing it. It's not something that... It's something mysterious, because Hari is a mysterious being. So it actually begins by listening and hearing about Hari. Then things develop from there. There's a process. Really, the key thing is the key thing, and the Bhagavatam is going to tell you this 100 billion times, and it's probably not until a 99,999,999,999 times that you're actually going to sink it in. But the Bhagavatam is telling us, listen to our description of Hari. That's what it's saying. Because that's how you do this top-down thing. Seema says, is everyone worthy of that unconditional love? So often it goes unreciprocated, misunderstood, so how do we discern? Nobody really is worthy of it. There's only one person who's worthy of it. Bhagavan. Xavier, Vic, doesn't this require desire for enlightenment? Of course. There's a difference between akarma and selfless love. Marie mentioned social work. Social work is akarma, which is a philanthropic deed. Philanthropic deed is a very good deed, and it will help clarify your karmas so that they can help show you what the self is really like, which is necessary in the beginning of trying to understand the self. So that's not unconditional love, that's unselfish action. It's not exactly the same. Love includes unselfish action, but unselfish action doesn't necessarily include unconditional love. So unconditional love is selfless action is recommended, but the problem is that there's no good guides or leaders in society anymore, so people are left to try to figure out all these things themselves. But a good guide will always remind you that part of your duty is to maintain the self, because without maintaining the self, you can't perform any unconditional actions. So care and concern for your own boundaries and care and concern for your own needs is not antithetical to unconditional selfless deeds. Most of the people who idealize selfless deeds forget that and they get burned out. All right, now check out the remaining part. The remaining part's going to actually drive this home in a very clear way. And actually, when I read this, I was like, oh my God, this is in the Bhagavatam. I thought that this particular teacher just made this up. And this was one of the things that I thought, wow, this teacher is cool. They came up with this analogy. I guess it's the next verse. Shreyasam api sarvesham atma hyavadir artaha sarvesham api bhutanam harir atma atmada priya. Atma atmada priya. Harir atma atmada priya. So what's he saying? The real measure of desirability or arta, the real way that you evaluate the desirability or arta of any attainment isn't how well it serves the self. That's what we talked about in the beginning. Why do you like a purse? Because it matches your style. The other friend doesn't like the same purse because it doesn't match her style. So we evaluate things in terms of how they serve the self. The measure of desirability in any attainment is how well it serves the self, but Hari is even more dear because he's the ultimate self of all selves. This is what Narada now is trying to clarify what the heck he said at the beginning. He said something at the beginning that everything, all of your efforts, thoughts, feelings should serve the ultimate master, Hari. And then he said, what's the use of doing anything else? Now he's going to explain why he said that. The real measure of desirability in any attainment is how well it serves the self. But Hari is even more dear because he's the ultimate self of all selves. Shreyasam, apisarvesham, atma yavadir arta. The arta, the shreyasa arta, the amount of goodness that's in anything, apisarvesham, is atma avadir, how well it serves the self, the person performing the deed, or the person owning the object. Sarvesham api bhutanam, but in all beings, the Atma of the Atma should be the most priya, the most dear, and that's Hari. Sarvesham api bhutanam harir Atma atmada priya. So again, keep the 1, 2, 3 layer self-concept in mind. Now this next thing he's going to give this analogy, which is fantastic. I heard this analogy for the first time when I was 18 years old. And then I could never get this analogy out of my head. Practically every day since I was been 18 years old. And just yesterday I realized that it's actually from the Bhagavatam. So he says, Yatha taror mula nishechanena. Just that alone, you just remember that. Yatha taror mula nishechanena. That means, nishechana means to water. Mula nishechanena means to water the root. Yata taru is a tree. The root of a tree. Water the root of the tree. Yata taror mula nishechanena. Yata means it's just like. That is the mind blower. It's like watering the root of a tree. This attitude, this 1, 2, 3 layer thing. The 1 is the root of 2, the 2 is the root of 3. If you just water 3, 1 and 2 are going to get malnourished. If you just water 2, then 1 is going to be malnourished. If 1 is malnourished, then 2 is malnourished too, because 1 is the nourisher of 2 and 2 is the nourisher of 3. It's only by nourishing 1 that 2 and 3 get nourished. 2 is the individual self, and 3 is the manifestation of the individual self, the body, the actions, the deeds, the thoughts, the feelings, the words. Yata taror mula nishechanena tripyanti tat skanda bhujopasaka. The skanda is the trunk, or the branch, right? The bhuja is the smaller branches, and the upasakas are the leaves and the twigs. tripya, their thirst is quenched. So now he gives this analogy. He says, if you want to nourish the leaf and have the tree produce a flower, you don't drip water on the leaf or try to make water soak into the twigs and the branches. You pour water in the ground by the root. He says, yata, that's what I'm talking about. It's like that. This is the relationship between hari, self, and body. If you want to nourish the body in your actions, you don't just pour water on it and go to the gym. It's going to prove futile, despite effort. Instead, you work on 2 to keep 3 nourished, and to keep 2 nourished, you work on 1. Hari. Yata, like watering the root of a tree, gives nourishment to the branches. Or he says, pranopaharachcha yatendriyanam. If you put stuff into upahara, if you put stuff in your stomach, then by the circulation called prana, all the indriya, all parts of the body, your eyes, your ears, your skin, get vitamins, get nourished, get calories. You don't actually try to take food and stick it in your ear so that you can hear well. Or like rub soup on your eyeball so that you can see well. You want to improve your vision, so like you're going to stick a carrot on your eye. You put the carrot in your stomach, and then the stomach distributes the food, distributes the nourishment to the body. So this is the second analogy that's similar to the one of watering the root to nourish the branches. In the same way, to make the self happy, you take care of the nourisher or the substance or the foundation of the self, which is hari. And that makes the self happy, and then that makes the self's manifestations happy, which is the body and everything that the body does. Yata taror mula nishechanena tripyanti tatskanda bujopasaka pranopaharachcha yatendriyanam tataiva sarvarhanam achyutyeta. That's the same. That's what I'm talking about here, about worshipping Hari. Achyutya. The real measure of desirability in any attainment is how well it serves the self, but Hari is even more dear because he is the ultimate self of all selves. Watering the root of a tree satisfies the whole tree. Trunk, branches, and leaves. The whole tree, not just one leaf. That's also the amazing part. Not just one leaf, but all the leaves of the tree. Watering the root of a tree satisfies the whole tree, trunk, branches, and leaves. Feeding the stomach distributes nourishment throughout the whole body. That which serves the infallible serves everyone. Good stuff. That's where we're going to stop today. So they asked Narada, how do you get to know who yourself is? Because it's only by knowing the self that you can get on the other side of existence, which means not on the confusion side. And Narada says the way you understand yourself is by understanding the super self, by understanding what it comes from, what it's based on, what it's rooted in. Which is yourself as a person, and the original person is Hari. And there's no point to doing anything else with yourself than that. Make sense? Any questions for me? Yes, who said that? Space Bug, you got it. So in serving, understanding the all-self, the ultimate, most beautiful single all, you serve your small self. You serve, you know, you become. That's correct also, Seema. Xavier Vic, would you say that this analogy is being used to persuade that spiritual knowledge is really good for things that would appear separate, but in fact dependent realities? I think yes, but I think you also have to address the ignorance of the separatism or the awareness of the separatism. So, for example, he says, well, what's the use of actions, or let me give you a better example. What's the use of a fit body, or what's the use of sannyas? He said that, right? So these will attain different ends. Physical fitness will attain sensual pleasure. Sannyas will attain mental equanimity, not sensual pleasure. So the point that I'm making is, depending on the immediate objective, it's not that all things are the same. So it's not that forget everything and just think about Hari in some abstract way. There's all these different things that the self can do through virtue of its birth and the fact that it has a body and senses and mind and vocal apparatus. There's all sorts of things. Narada is saying these things should be done to understand the self and the super self in specific ways. But they shouldn't be done missing the point. So he's not advising abandonment of yoga, for example. The Prachetas are performing yoga and he's very happy with it. Nor is he advising abandonment of fitness, physical fitness. That's, I think, important to understand, because people will misapply this concept. So they'll say that one nurses two, two nurses three. So I'm not going to do anything on the level of 3 anymore. I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to do 1. Well, what are you going to do with 1? You do the things in 3 in a 1-centric way. That's what you do. You don't abandon the things on level 3. I9 Bash says his ass is listening hard. I'm glad. That will be level 4, I think. Seema, I think you're talking to Bardo. Shiv Kumar says, if your small self is not satisfied with its life and unhappy, how can it serve Hari? Very true. So this is why you do have to go up a little bit from 2 to 1. But ultimately, it's not from 2 that 1 gets happy. It's from 1 that 2 gets happy. Oracle says, is it an accurate statement to say we're all expressions of Hari? Yes. Alpha is the best ambitions. I ratify all of Alpha's ambitions. All right, guys. See you next week. Have a good weekend. This was a good spot, right? This was a good bit. What's my view on Maya? I have, just look up Victor Cara Maya, YouTube. Check that in Google. I have a video on it. Thank you very much, everyone. Melissa's the farmer. Let's see all these nice. I'll shut down the stream, but I'll watch all these cool emojis now.